What steps do you take to assist the buyer as the transaction progresses? Because we know there's a lot of steps.
There are a lot of steps in a commercial real estate deal.
Yeah.
Usually by the time a client comes to me, the client's identified a property that he or she is interested in. And sometimes with help from people like you, Lynn, the brokers, he's obtained response to his RFP, or he signed an LOI or a term sheet, which identifies some of the basic business terms of the transactions the parties have agreed to. So I like to start by having a pretty comprehensive discussion with the buyer as to what they like about the property, what their needs are, and otherwise what they're looking for. That helps me to get a sense of which things are going to be important in the transaction. And then I identify things that aren't usually covered in one of these preliminary documents or discussions, and discuss with my client how those items should be covered in the purchase document. And with that background in hand, I'll prepare the purchase agreement, or I'll review an agreement that's been prepared by the other party or their attorney. Once we've worked out any of the additional terms and provisions, and we've signed the purchase agreement, the buyer then moves on to the next step, and I go with. And that is the investigation part of the transaction, which is often called, in our parlance, due diligence. And that involves obtaining and reviewing title work, survey, doing a physical inspection, maybe an environmental review, and a review of other types of documents. At the same time as due diligence is going on, it's generally the case that we need to start and negotiate the mortgage loan if there is going to be mortgage financing for the transaction, and I help the buyer work out any of the terms and conditions necessary and review those documents. And then as time is going on, I'm monitoring whether or not any of the conditions to closing that we've identified in the purchase agreement are being satisfied, or if anything is outstanding. All along, as this time goes on, both the buyer and I have to be very conscious of the deadlines that are in the purchase agreement. We have to make sure that we complete all of the matters that we are responsible for within the contractual time period, so that we avoid default and so that we preserve our rights under the purchase agreement. And then as we get closer to closing, I'll review the closing documentation, like the deed, if there's a bill of sale because personal property is being transferred in, and material of that nature. And if there are peripheral documents that are going to be part of the transaction, because for instance, the seller is granting the buyer a separate easement, we will work on those transactional documents as well. Shortly before closing, we'll contact the escrow agent, because most closings these days are handled through an independent escrow agent, most frequently the title company that's issuing the title policy. And we'll submit materials to them and basically get them teed up for the closing process. Then once closing has been completed, we'll make sure that the right documents have been recorded to evidence the buyer's ownership of the property. And we'll typically send our client a closing docket that includes all of the closing materials so that they've got them in one place.